The woman, Amara, had always believed in the value of hard work. For years, she had worked double shifts as a nurse, juggling long hours with raising her 2 children as a single mother. Her face carried the gentle lines of someone who had smiled through struggles, who found joy in little victories. That day, she had decided to treat herself, a rare indulgence for someone who always put her family first. Clad in simple jeans, a well-worn cardigan, and sneakers, Amara's outward appearance didn't reflect the quiet strength and dignity within her. Her goal was modest but deeply personal: a leather handbag from Delmont Luxe, a high-end fashion store she had admired from afar for years. The bag wasn't just an accessory, it was a symbol of her perseverance. She'd saved for months, skipping small luxuries like coffee runs or takeout meals, just to step into this moment. On the other side of the equation was David Langley, the store manager. To those who worked under him, David was a man driven by appearances. He was quick to praise wealthy clients and just as quick to belittle anyone he deemed undesirable. His upbringing in a wealthy, predominantly white suburb had nurtured his sense of superiority. David thrived on the exclusivity of his store, believing it reflected his own worth. He saw himself as the gatekeeper of luxury. And today, that gate was about to be challenged. The luxury shopping mall was alive with activity. Towering glass ceilings reflected soft sunlight onto marble floors, where elegantly dressed shoppers strolled past boutique stores carrying bags from brands that screamed wealth. Inside Delmont Luxe, the world was a polished contrast to the chaos outside. Shelves displayed handbags, shoes, and accessories under soft lighting, each item seemingly glowing with unattainable perfection. The staff, dressed in sleek uniforms, moved with an air of superiority, their eyes scanning customers like security cameras. When Amara walked in, her presence disrupted the unspoken rhythm of the store. Heads turned, and whispers followed. She felt the weight of their eyes but squared her shoulders, clutching her purse tightly. She was here for one thing: the bag she had dreamed of for years. Amara's first moments in the store were met with silence. She approached a display near the entrance, her fingers brushing the edge of a bag she had seen online. It felt surreal to be so close to something she had only imagined owning. A sales associate glanced at her, their expression skeptical, but Amara ignored it and continued browsing. That's when David Langley appeared. His eyes scanned her from head to toe, his lips curling into a barely concealed sneer. He approached her with the air of someone preparing for battle, his polished leather shoes clicking against the marble floor. Without introducing himself, he blocked her path. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone clipped and cold. Amara smiled politely. "Yes, I'd like to see this bag, please," she said, gesturing toward the display. David raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? This isn't the kind of store where we allow browsing without intention to purchase." Amara blinked, her smile faltering. I do intend to purchase." David's laugh was sharp and derisive, drawing the attention of nearby customers. "With all due respect, ma'am, these bags cost more than a couple of paychecks. Are you lost?" The words hit Amara like a slap. She took a steadying breath. "I know how much it costs. I've been saving for it." David's face hardened. "Saving? That's admirable. But we reserve our time for serious buyers. I think you might be more comfortable in one of the department stores downstairs." The humiliation burned in her chest. Amara felt her throat tighten, but she refused to let tears fall. "I am a serious buyer," she said firmly, "and I have every right to be here." David leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper laced with venom. "You don't belong here. Don't make a scene." At that moment, another shopper, a young woman with an expensive coat draped over her arm, paused nearby. She watched the interaction, her brow furrowing. Amara noticed her, but before she could speak, David raised his voice. "I need you to leave," he announced, his tone sharp enough to cut through the soft music playing in the background. Now, the store froze. Shoppers and staff alike turned to witness the unfolding drama. Amara's face burned with shame and anger. "You're throwing me out because you think I can't afford this? Because of how I look?" David crossed his arms. "If you want to interpret it that way, that's on you." "Security," he called out, his voice echoing through the store. The silence was deafening as 2 security guards approached. Amara's voice shook, but she forced herself to speak. "This is discrimination. You're treating me this way because I'm black." David's smirk only deepened. I'm treating you this way because you're wasting my time. A murmur spread among the onlookers. The woman in the expensive coat pulled out her phone, recording the scene. This isn't right, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. Others nodded, their disapproval evident, but it was too late. The guards escorted Amara to the door. As she stepped outside, the weight of humiliation crashed down on her. She stood there, trembling, tears streaming down her face, while the luxury mall continued its indifferent rhythm around her. Inside, David returned to his position, his chest puffed with triumph. But he didn't notice the ripple effect of the incident, the whispers, the disapproving glances, and most importantly, the woman with the phone uploading her video to social media with the caption, "Racism in plain sight." As Amara walked away, her head held high despite the tears, the first notifications of the video began to light up screens. What had started as one man's act of prejudice was about to explode into a public reckoning. One that neither Amara nor David could have anticipated. Amara stood at her bedroom mirror that morning, inspecting her reflection. Her jeans were neatly pressed, and her cardigan, though a bit faded, was clean and comfortable. Her hair, styled in neat twists, framed her face beautifully. She added a touch of lip balm, hesitating before deciding against makeup. This was her, simple, understated, but determined. The thought of entering the luxury store filled her with a mix of excitement and trepidation. She had saved for so long, skipping movie nights, her favorite takeout, and even new school supplies for herself while finishing her part-time nursing degree. But today wasn't about anyone else. Today was for her. As she picked up her purse, her daughter, Kayla, peeked in. "Mom, are you sure you don't want me to come with you? What if they're, weird about it?" Amara smiled, stroking her daughter's cheek. "Sweetheart, this is my treat. I need to do this for myself. Besides, I can handle anything." Kayla wasn't convinced but nodded. "You look beautiful. Go get that bag, Mom." Meanwhile, across town, David Langley was pacing the polished floor of Delmont Luxe, barking instructions to his staff. "I want every display perfect," he snapped. "We have high-profile clients coming in today. No mistakes." David prided himself on his position, not because he loved the work but because it put him in a place of power over others. The exclusivity of the store fed his ego. To him, the brand wasn't just about luxury, it was a fortress, one that kept out the undesirables. The mall was buzzing when Amara arrived. She paused in front of the glass facade of Delmont Luxe, taking a deep breath. The store was intimidating, with its towering glass walls and sleek interior that seemed to whisper, "This isn't for you." Stepping inside, she was greeted by a faint melody of classical music and the soft scent of expensive leather. The bags were displayed like trophies, each one commanding attention with its polished brass details and rich colors. Amara walked carefully, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the pristine marble floor. The staff noticed her immediately. A young sales associate whispered to another, her eyes darting toward Amara. Their smirks were subtle but unmistakable. Still, Amara moved forward, determined to hold her ground. Amara's heart fluttered when she saw the bag, a structured leather handbag in deep burgundy. Its elegant design and understated logo were exactly what she wanted. She reached out to touch it, but before her fingers could graze the surface, a voice interrupted her. "Excuse me," David Langley said, appearing out of nowhere. His tone wasn't welcoming, it was probing, suspicious. "Can I help you with something?" Amara turned to face him, startled. His eyes scanned her, lingering on her sneakers and worn cardigan. She offered a polite smile. "Yes, I'd like to see this bag. Please." David's lips pressed into a thin line. "This bag is part of our premium collection. It's very expensive." Amara blinked, caught off guard by the tone. "I understand. I've been saving for it." David's eyebrows shot up, his expression a mix of surprise and disdain. "Saving?" he repeated, loud enough for a nearby customer to glance their way. "Well, that's interesting." Amara felt the humiliation start to creep in, but she kept her voice steady. "Is there a problem?" David folded his arms. "Look, I don't mean to be rude, but this isn't the kind of store where people save up. We cater to clients who can afford these items outright." The words hung in the air like a slap. Amara could feel the eyes of other shoppers on her now. "I'm not asking for a loan," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "I have the money. I just want to see the bag." David's smirk deepened. I think you'd be more comfortable at one of the stores downstairs. They have lovely handbags at a fraction of the price. Amara's hands tightened into fists at her sides. Why would you assume I can't afford this? Is it because of how I look? Or is it because I'm black? A sharp intake of breath came from a nearby shopper. David's face darkened, but he didn't back down. I don't care what color you are, he said coldly, but I know our clientele. And you're not it. Amara could feel the rage bubbling inside her, but she refused to let him win. You have no right to treat me like this, she said firmly. You don't know anything about me. David chuckled bitterly. I know enough, and I'm asking you to leave before this becomes embarrassing for you. At that moment, a woman in a designer coat, standing near the checkout counter, pulled out her phone and began recording. Another shopper, a middle-aged man with a briefcase, muttered, "This is ridiculous." But David ignored them. "Security," he called out, raising his voice to summon 2 guards who had been stationed outside. The guards approached, their expressions hesitant as they took in the scene. Amara stood her ground. "I'm not leaving. I have done nothing wrong. You're disrupting the experience for our other guests," David said with mock patience. "Escort her out." The guards exchanged uneasy glances. "Sir, she's not doing anything." "Now," David barked, cutting them off. His voice echoed across the store, silencing the murmurs of other customers. As the guards reluctantly approached her, Amara turned to the growing crowd. "Do you see this? This is what black people deal with every day. I came here to buy a bag I've worked hard for, and I'm being thrown out because this man thinks I don't belong." The room was heavy with tension. The woman recording spoke up. "You're not wrong, and the world's about to see this." David's eyes darted toward her, panic flickering across his face for a brief moment. But his pride wouldn't let him back down. "Let her film," he sneered. "I'm doing my job," as Amara was escorted to the door. The humiliation hit her in full force. Tears burned in her eyes. But she held her head high. Outside the store, she paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. She thought of Kayla, of the lessons she tried to teach her children about resilience and dignity. What kind of world am I preparing them for? Back inside, the atmosphere was tense. David pretended to return to his work, but the murmurs of disapproval from shoppers were impossible to ignore. The woman with the phone uploaded the video on the spot, captioning it, "Racism at Delmont Lux, this isn't over." And it wasn't. As Amara walked away, the first notifications began popping up. Views climbed by the second, and the outrage was immediate. The name David Langley was about to become infamous, but not in the way he had always dreamed as Amara walked through the mall's wide, glossy corridors. The initial shock began to give way to a deep anger. She thought about how she had been dismissed, not just as a customer but as a person. It wasn't the first time she had encountered prejudice. But today, it cut deeper. She had worked tirelessly to earn her way into spaces like this. Yet her effort, her very existence, had been deemed unworthy in a matter of seconds. Behind her, the incident was no longer confined to the walls of Delmont Lux. The video, now circulating on social media, was drawing rapid attention. Comments poured in under the post. "This is disgusting. How is this still happening in 2024? Boycott Delmont Lux until they fix their racist practices. Who's the manager? He needs to be fired." Unaware of the storm brewing online, David Langley continued his day as if nothing had happened. To him, the incident was a necessary assertion of authority, a reminder that the store's exclusivity was not to be compromised. His colleagues, however, weren't so sure. Whispers spread among the staff. "She didn't seem like a problem." One whispered, "David went too far." Another murmured, "The woman who had recorded the incident remained in the store, her phone buzzing with notifications." She glanced at David, her expression unreadable, and made her way out quietly. She had seen this kind of behavior before, but never this brazen. "This is going to go viral," she muttered to herself as she walked out. Amara found herself sitting on a bench just outside the mall. Trying to steady her breathing, she replayed the incident in her mind, every word stinging anew. Part of her wanted to go home, hide under her blankets, and cry, but another part, the stronger part, refused to let this injustice define her day. Her phone buzzed. It was Kayla. "Mom, did you get it?" Amara hesitated, her voice thick. "Not yet, sweetie. I ran into some trouble." "Are you okay?" Kayla's voice sharpened with concern. "I'm fine," Amara said, though she didn't entirely believe it herself. "I'll be home soon." As she hung up, a young man approached her cautiously. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, holding out his phone. "I saw what happened in the store. It's all over social media. People are furious." Amara blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" The man showed her the video. There she was, standing in the middle of the store, her dignity under attack. The caption underlined the injustice. "Black woman harassed and thrown out of luxury store for not belonging." Amara felt a mix of emotions: anger, embarrassment, and a spark of something unexpected: hope. People were seeing the truth. Maybe this time, it wouldn't be swept under the rug. "Do you want me to tag you in this?" the young man asked. Amara shook her head. "No, thank you, but I need to process this first." He nodded, understanding. "You should know, though, a lot of people have your back. You're not alone." Back in Delmont Lux, David Langley was oblivious to the growing backlash. He chatted with a wealthy regular, boasting about his store's exclusivity. "You'd be amazed at some of the people who try to get in here," he said with a chuckle. "I had to turn someone away just this morning." The client gave a polite but awkward laugh. "Well, I hope you handled it delicately," she said, sensing something off. David brushed it off. "I always do." But his confidence began to waver when his assistant manager, Clara, approached him. "David," she said hesitantly, "I think you should see this." She handed him her tablet, where the video was playing on repeat. The headline under the post now read, "Delmont Lux, Luxury or Racism?" David's smirk faltered. "What is this?" he demanded. "It's you," Clara said. Her voice was steady but carried an undertone of quiet accusation. "That woman you threw out? Someone recorded it. It's everywhere now." David's jaw tightened. "This is ridiculous. People love to overreact." Clara's expression didn't change. "Corporate isn't going to see it that way." Elsewhere in the mall, the woman who had recorded the video, Jennifer, was approached by a local journalist. "I saw your post," the journalist said. "Do you mind if I ask a few questions?" Jennifer hesitated but agreed. "I've shopped at Delmont Lux before, and I've seen how they treat people. But today was different." The manager didn't just discriminate quietly, he humiliated her in front of everyone. The journalist nodded. "And you think this reflects broader issues in how certain customers are treated?" "Absolutely," Jennifer said firmly. "This wasn't about a handbag. It was about who gets to feel like they belong in spaces like that." As the journalist took notes, another witness approached. It was the middle-aged man with the briefcase. "I saw everything too," he said. "What that manager did was wrong. If you're writing about this, I want my name attached." It's time someone called them out. By the evening, the video had amassed hundreds of thousands of views, and hashtags like #Justice for Amara and #Boycott Delmont Lux were trending. Amara's phone buzzed with calls and messages from friends, colleagues, and even strangers who had seen the footage. One message stood out. It was from a local advocacy group. "Hi Amara. We saw the video. If you're ready to share your story, we'd love to help you take action." Amara stared at the screen. Part of her wanted to let it all blow over. She didn't ask for this attention, she just wanted to buy a bag. But another part of her, the part that wanted a better future for Kayla and others like her, knew she couldn't stay silent. She replied, "Let's talk." Back at the store, David's phone rang. It was an unknown number. But he answered, his tone impatient. "This is David Langley." The voice on the other end was stern. "Mr. Langley, this is the Delmont Lux corporate office. We need to talk about the video circulating online. Effective immediately. You are suspended pending an investigation." David's hand tightened around his phone. "Suspended? Over some internet nonsense?" "It's not nonsense," the voice replied coldly. "You've jeopardized the reputation of the entire brand. Prepare for a formal review." As the call ended, David sat down heavily at his desk, his confidence crumbling for the first time. He glanced at the store's entrance, half expecting Amara to walk back in, but she was long gone. And the reckoning had only just begun. By the next morning, the video had become a sensation. News outlets picked up the story, and hashtags like #Justice for Amara and #Racism in Luxury were trending on every social media platform. Clips of David Langley's condescending tone and the moment Amara was escorted out of the store were spliced together with captions calling for accountability. Amara woke to find her phone buzzing with notifications. Messages from friends, Strangers and journalists flooded her inbox. At first, she felt overwhelmed, unsure how to handle the sudden spotlight. Then she saw a message from her daughter. Kayla, Mom, you're going viral. Everyone's supporting you. You're amazing. Her heart swelled with a mix of pride and trepidation. Amara hadn't sought this attention. But if her story could spark change, she wasn't going to shrink from it. She agreed to an interview with a prominent news station, her voice calm but firm as she recounted the humiliation she had endured. This wasn't just about me, she said, her eyes steady. This is about how society sees people like me, black, working class, and determined to rise above expectations. We deserve respect, no matter where we are. While Amara's story gained traction, David Langley's world was crumbling. By the time he arrived at work that morning, the atmosphere in the store was tense. Colleagues avoided his gaze, their whispers barely concealed. Clara, the assistant manager, handed him a memo from corporate, mandatory meeting, video incident review. David scoffed as he read it. This is absurd, he muttered. Social media outrage doesn't mean anything. But he couldn't ignore the growing backlash. The store's official account had been inundated with comments demanding justice, many threatening to boycott the brand. When David finally joined the video call with corporate, his usual bravado was replaced by a thin veneer of defensiveness. This is being blown out of proportion, he argued. I was protecting the store's reputation. The executive on the other end didn't flinch. Your actions have tarnished the reputation of Delmont Lux, she said coldly. We've received complaints from former employees citing a pattern of discriminatory behavior under your management. Effective immediately. You are terminated. The words hit David like a punch. Terminated? Over one incident? It's not just one incident. Mr. Langley, your decisions have cost this company dearly. And we can no longer afford to associate with you. As the call ended, David sat frozen in his chair. For the first time, the weight of his actions began to sink in. He wasn't just losing his job, he was losing everything he had built his identity around. The fallout didn't end with David's termination. Former employees came forward to share their own stories, detailing his history of mistreatment and bias. One employee recounted how David had mocked her accent during a staff meeting. Another revealed how he had quietly fired a black salesperson after claiming they didn't fit the brand's image. These stories further fueled the public's outrage. Advocacy groups began calling for broader changes within the luxury retail industry, highlighting how discrimination was often embedded in corporate culture. Meanwhile, the Delmont Lux headquarters issued a carefully worded statement. We do not tolerate discrimination in any form. We are committed to fostering an inclusive shopping experience and are taking immediate steps to address this incident. But for many, it wasn't enough. Protests sprang up outside Delmont Lux stores in major cities, with demonstrators holding signs reading, "Luxury for all," and "Racism is out of style." As the world rallied behind her, Amara found herself thrust into a role she hadn't anticipated, that of an advocate. She partnered with a prominent racial justice organization, appearing at rallies and speaking on panels about the broader implications of her experience. In one particularly moving moment, Amara stood before a crowd of supporters outside a Delmont Lux store. What happened to me isn't unique, she said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. It's just one example of the daily indignities that black people face in spaces we're told we don't belong in. But we do belong, and we're not staying silent anymore. Her words resonated deeply. People began sharing their own stories of discrimination, and the movement grew. Amara's strength inspired others to speak out, creating a ripple effect far beyond the confines of one luxury store. While Amara rose, David's life spiraled further out of control. Jobless and with a tarnished reputation, he struggled to find new employment. His name was now synonymous with the video, making him a pariah in the industry. Bills piled up as his severance pay dwindled. His luxurious apartment, once a source of pride, became a suffocating reminder of his fall from grace. Friends he had once considered close stopped answering his calls, their loyalty evaporating in the face of public shame. One night, as David sat in his darkened living room, a bottle of whiskey in hand, he replayed the video on his phone. He barely recognized himself in the man on the screen, the arrogance, the disdain. For the first time, he saw the pain in Amara's eyes and felt a pang of something unfamiliar. Regret. Amara's advocacy work began to yield tangible results. Under pressure from activists and the public, Delmont Lux announced a comprehensive review of its hiring and training practices. They pledged to implement diversity training and create scholarships for underrepresented groups seeking careers in fashion. Amara was invited to join a panel advising the company on these changes. Though skeptical at first, she agreed, determined to ensure the promises were more than empty words. "If I can make things better for the next person," she told Kayla one evening, "then all of this will have been worth it." Her work extended beyond the corporate sphere. Amara started a community initiative called Belonging Matters, which provided resources and support for people facing discrimination in professional spaces. The initiative quickly gained traction, attracting donations and volunteers from around the country one day. During a community event, Amara spotted a familiar face in the crowd. It was David Langley, standing at the edge of the gathering, his posture hesitant. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air seemed to freeze. David approached slowly, his once confident demeanor replaced by a humility that bordered on desperation. "Amara," he said quietly, "can I speak with you?" She studied him, her expression unreadable. "What do you want?" "I'm not here to make excuses," he said, his voice trembling. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." Amara's heart raced, but she kept her composure. "Sorry doesn't erase what happened." "I know," David said, his eyes glistening. "I've lost everything because of what I did. And maybe I deserved it. But I'm trying to be better. I'm here because I want to help." Amara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she pointed to a table where volunteers were signing people up for workshops. "If you're serious about helping, start there." David nodded, his shoulders sagging with relief. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a chance, a small step toward redemption that night. As Amara reflected on the day's events, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from a major news outlet, inviting her to share her story on a national stage. She looked at Kayla, who was beaming with pride. "Are you ready, Mom?" Kayla asked. Amara smiled, her eyes shining with determination. "I've been ready my whole life." Meanwhile, in his small apartment, David stared at the volunteer form he had filled out, wondering if he had the strength to rebuild his life. The echoes of his past still haunted him, but for the first time, he felt a flicker of hope. The stage was set for a transformative final chapter, one where redemption and resilience would collide. By mid-morning the day after the incident, the video had crossed 1 million views, trending across platforms and sparking fiery debates online. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like #JusticeForAmara, #BoycottDelmontLux, and #racism in retail. The video wasn't just about David Langley anymore. It had become a symbol of the everyday indignities faced by black customers in spaces of privilege. Some comments supported Amara with unwavering empathy. "This is exactly why representation matters. People like David think they're gatekeepers of luxury. But they're just exposing their ignorance. Amara, you are brave. Keep speaking up." Others, however, were less kind. "Why make a big deal out of this? If you can't afford luxury, don't go there." Another case of cancel culture blowing things out of proportion. Amara saw the comments but refused to be silenced. In a quiet moment at home, she recorded a heartfelt video response, her face resolute but compassionate. "I didn't ask for this attention," she began, "but if my experience can shine a light on something bigger, then I won't hide. This isn't about one bad manager. It's about a system that tells people like me, black, hardworking, deserving, that we're out of place in spaces of privilege. We belong here, and I won't stop fighting until everyone knows that." Her video was shared tens of thousands of times within hours, solidifying her as the face of a growing movement for David. The consequences were immediate and relentless. His termination from Delmont Lux came not with a private conversation, but with a public statement from the company. "We have parted ways with Mr. Langley and are reviewing our policies to ensure incidents like this never occur again." When David read the statement, his anger boiled over. Parted ways? He thought bitterly. They had thrown him under the bus to save themselves. He didn't sleep that night, pacing his luxury apartment as the walls seemed to close in around him. His once immaculate living room was now cluttered with half-empty wine glasses and overdue bills. By the next morning, his face was plastered across news outlets. "Racist manager fired amid backlash," was the headline of one particularly scathing article. Former employees began speaking out. their testimonies painting a damning picture of his time at the store. He constantly made derogatory remarks about black customers. One said, "He told me to focus on white shoppers because they're the ones who buy," another revealed. David's attempts to defend himself fell flat. In a hastily written statement shared on a smaller news site, he wrote, "I acted in the best interest of the store. This has been taken out of context. I am not a racist." The statement only fueled more backlash. Commenters tore it apart. Not a racist? The video speaks for itself. If this is best interest, maybe the store's better off without you. David's isolation deepened. His former colleagues distanced themselves. Old friends ignored his calls. And his once glamorous network evaporated. Alone in his apartment, he stared at the mounting bills and wondered if he had finally pushed too far. Amara, meanwhile, found herself standing taller than ever. A prominent advocacy group reached out, inviting her to join a panel on systemic racism in retail spaces. At first, she hesitated. She wasn't an activist, she was just a mother. A nurse, a woman who had wanted to buy a bag. But when she thought of Kayla and the world she wanted her daughter to grow up in, she agreed. At the panel, Amara's voice shook slightly at first. But as she spoke, the audience leaned in. "This isn't just my story," she said, gripping the microphone tightly. "It's the story of countless people who are judged not by their character, but by their appearance. I've worked hard my whole life. I deserve respect. And so does everyone else who walks into a store like Delmont Luxe." Her words were met with a standing ovation, and her confidence grew. Amara began working closely with the advocacy group, participating in interviews, writing op-eds, and even advising companies on how to create truly inclusive environments. The incident catalyzed more than just conversations. Delmont Luxe faced financial repercussions as protests erupted outside their stores in major cities. Demonstrators held signs reading, "Luxury isn't exclusive to one race. Boycott racism. Boycott Delmont Luxe." Sales plummeted, and several high-profile celebrities publicly distanced themselves from the brand. "I can't support a company that tolerates this behavior," one tweeted, garnering hundreds of thousands of likes. Under immense pressure, Delmont Luxe announced a sweeping series of reforms, including mandatory anti-racism training for all employees, diversity audits, and a $2 million fund to support black entrepreneurs in fashion. They also reached out to Amara, offering her a public apology and inviting her to consult on their new initiatives. Amara agreed, but only under her terms. "I'm not here to help you save face," she told their executives in a tense meeting. "I'm here to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." David, now unemployed and buried in debt, began to confront the consequences of his actions in a more personal way. He saw the video everywhere, on TV, online, even overhearing people discussing it in cafes. The man in the video felt both like himself and a stranger. He couldn't deny the arrogance in his tone, the sneer on his face. One night, after a few drinks, he Googled Amara Delmont Luxe incident and found her recent panel discussion. Watching her speak, something shifted in him. Her dignity, her strength, her refusal to let the experience define her. He couldn't reconcile it with the version of her he had created in his mind that day. Driven by guilt, he decided to attend one of the advocacy group's workshops. Not as a speaker but as a participant. Sitting among strangers, he listened to stories of discrimination, each one a mirror reflecting his own complicity. When the workshop ended, David stayed behind. He approached the facilitator, his voice quiet. "I need to do more. What can I do?" Months later, at a community event organized by Amara's initiative, Belonging Matters, their paths crossed again. David had volunteered to help set up tables and hand out flyers, working silently and avoiding attention. But Amara noticed him almost immediately. She approached him, her expression unreadable. "David," he froze, the flyers trembling in his hands. "Amara, I'm just here to help. No agenda." For a moment, she said nothing, her eyes scanning him. Finally, she nodded. "Good, let's see if you mean it." Over the weeks that followed, David continued to volunteer. He never sought recognition, and Amara slowly began to see glimpses of genuine change in him. While forgiveness didn't come easily, she realized that even someone like David could learn, grow, and contribute to the fight for justice as the year drew to a close. Amara reflected on how much her life had changed. She had become an advocate, a symbol of resilience, and a voice for those who had been silenced. Yet she remained grounded, focusing on her family and the community she loved. David, now working for a nonprofit dedicated to combating workplace discrimination, found a new sense of purpose in his life. He would never erase what he had done, but he was determined to make amends in any way he could. The incident at Dalemont Lux had changed both their lives, in ways neither could have predicted. It was proof that even in the face of pain, injustice, and division, there was always room for transformation, and the power to rewrite the narrative at Dalemont Lux's headquarters. The situation was nearing a boiling point. Public relations teams scrambled to manage the fallout. Executives debated damage control strategies, and lawyers prepared for potential lawsuits. Every major news network had picked up the story, and the viral video showed no signs of losing momentum. In an emergency board meeting, the CEO, Margaret Duvall, glared at the room full of executives. "This isn't just about one store or one manager. It's about the culture we've allowed to fester. If we don't address this now, there might not be a company left to save." The room fell silent as she continued. "We're not just facing public outrage, we're seeing the beginnings of a financial disaster. High-profile clients are pulling out. Investors are losing confidence. If we don't make sweeping changes, we're done." Margaret's tone shifted from icy to decisive. "Here's what we're going to do. Launch a full internal investigation. Hire external diversity consultants, and publicly commit to structural reforms. And I want Amara on board as a consultant." One executive hesitated. "Do you think she'll even agree after what we put her through?" Margaret's sharp glare silenced him. "She doesn't owe us anything. But we owe her everything." As Dalemont Lux worked on its public apology, grassroots movements across the country were gaining strength. Protests outside Dalemont Lux stores had spread internationally, drawing attention to systemic racism within the fashion industry as a whole. Amara was no longer just a symbol of injustice, she had become the voice of a movement. People began reaching out to her with their own stories of being mistreated, dismissed, or judged unfairly. One message stood out. A young woman named Elena shared how she had been turned away from an upscale department store for not looking the part. "Your courage gives me hope," Elena wrote. "For the first time, I feel like someone sees me." Amara replied personally, offering words of encouragement. That night, she lay awake, the weight of her newfound role pressing down on her. She had always been a fighter, but this felt bigger than anything she had faced before. The next morning, she called the advocacy group she had partnered with. "I want to do more," she said firmly. "What's the next step?" As Amara gained traction, so did attempts to discredit her. Certain news outlets, aligned with more conservative audiences, framed her as an opportunist. One particularly harsh segment featured a panelist saying, "This is just another case of cancel culture run amok. Amara didn't belong in that store. And now she's milking the situation for fame." When Amara's friends forwarded her clips of these segments, she felt a pang of anger, but also determination. She agreed to appear on a live televised debate, facing one of her loudest critics head-on. During the debate, the host asked, "Amara, how do you respond to claims that you're blowing this incident out of proportion?" Amara's expression didn't waver. "Blowing it out of proportion?" she repeated calmly. "What's being blown out of proportion is the idea that spaces like Dalemont Lux are too good for people like me. This isn't just about a handbag. It's about challenging a system that dehumanizes people based on their skin color, their income, or their appearance." Her words struck a chord, and even her critics seemed momentarily silenced. The audience erupted into applause, and the clip went viral, further solidifying Amara's place as a leading voice in the fight for equity. For David, life continued to unravel. The once proud manager who had relished his position at the helm of Dalemont Lux now found himself shunned by the industry. Even smaller retail chains turned him away, unwilling to risk the bad publicity. One afternoon, while scrolling aimlessly through his phone, he stumbled upon an article titled, "The Woman Who Changed the Luxury Industry: Amara's Journey from Humiliation to Heroism." David read every word, his stomach sinking deeper with each paragraph. The article painted a stark contrast between Amara's rise and his fall. He wasn't just unemployed, he was a cautionary tale. The villain in a story that had captivated millions. Overwhelmed, he walked to the nearest bar and ordered a drink. As he nursed his whiskey, He overheard two patrons discussing the Dalemont Lux scandal. "That manager was such a jerk." One said. "Yeah, but I hope he learns something from it. Everyone deserves a chance to change." The other replied. David stared into his glass. "Do I even deserve a chance?" He wondered. He left the bar without finishing his drink, the weight of his actions suffocating him. A few days later, David received an email from a nonprofit focused on workplace inclusivity. They had seen his name in the news and invited him to participate in a workshop for individuals seeking to understand and confront their biases. At first, he hesitated. The idea of sitting in a room full of people who would judge him felt unbearable. But something in him, perhaps guilt, perhaps the faint hope of redemption, compelled him to reply. "I'll be there," he wrote. At the workshop, David was confronted with uncomfortable truths. He listened to others share their experiences of being marginalized, realizing how deeply his actions had hurt people like them. For the first time, he stopped defending himself and started listening. Meanwhile, Amara's initiative, Belonging Matters, was gaining momentum. The nonprofit she had founded provided resources for individuals facing workplace discrimination and lobbied for stronger anti-bias policies in retail and corporate environments. During a fundraising gala for the organization, Amara stood on stage, addressing a packed room. "This isn't just my fight," she said. "It's our fight. Together, we can dismantle the systems that tell people they're not good enough. We can create spaces where everyone feels like they belong." Her words were met with thunderous applause. Among the attendees was Elena, the young woman who had shared her story. "You changed my life," Elena whispered tearfully as she hugged Amara after the event. Months later, at one of Amara's community workshops, David arrived unannounced. He stood at the back of the room, listening quietly as Amara spoke about resilience and the importance of accountability. When the session ended, he approached her cautiously. "Amara," he began, his voice trembling. I don't even know where to start." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Start by being honest." David took a deep breath. "I was wrong. I was arrogant, blind to my biases, and I hurt you in ways I can't take back. But I'm trying to change. I'm here to learn, not for forgiveness, but because I don't want to be that person anymore." Amara studied him for a long moment. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she said, "but showing up is a good first step." For the first time in months, David felt a glimmer of hope as Amara walked away. She glanced back at David, watching as he awkwardly introduced himself to the workshop facilitator. Part of her wondered if he was truly capable of change. Another part, the one that believed in second chances, hoped he would prove her wrong. Meanwhile, Dalemont Lux faced a new wave of criticism, as investigative journalists uncovered systemic discrimination in their hiring practices. Amara's fight was far from over. But she was ready. The next chapter would test everyone, Amara, David, and the system itself, pushing them toward a reckoning that would define their futures. David Langley had always thought of himself as someone who understood the world, someone in control, confident, and secure. But in the months since the incident at Dalemont Lux, that illusion had crumbled. For weeks, he had avoided mirrors, unable to face the reflection of a man whose actions had brought shame. Not just on himself, but on everyone connected to him. One night, as he sat in his dimly lit apartment, he came across another article about Amara. It detailed her rise as an advocate and her growing influence in pushing for systemic changes in the retail industry. The story mentioned her nonprofit, Belonging Matters, and highlighted the lives she had already touched. For the first time, David truly saw the gulf between their lives. Amara, despite being humiliated, had used her pain to build something meaningful. Meanwhile, he had spent months wallowing in self-pity. A single question haunted him. Why hadn't I seen her as a person that day? He couldn't sleep that night. The faces of the people he had dismissed, mistreated, and judged over the years swirled in his mind. Finally, he made a decision. He would reach out to Amara, not for forgiveness, but to acknowledge his wrongs and find a way to make amends. David's opportunity came sooner than he expected. One afternoon, while volunteering at a community center, he saw a poster advertising an event hosted by Belonging Matters. The event, a panel discussion on bias in the workplace, would feature Amara as the keynote speaker. When the day arrived, David slipped into the back of the auditorium, keeping a low profile. The room buzzed with energy, filled with people eager to hear Amara's story. David felt out of place but stayed rooted to his chair. When Amara took the stage, the audience erupted in applause. She began speaking, her voice steady and warm. "Today, we're not just here to talk about the problem," she said, scanning the crowd. "We're here to talk about solutions. How we can dismantle the systems that perpetuate inequality and create spaces where everyone belongs." David's heart pounded as he listened. Her words felt like they were directed straight at him. After the event, he waited, his nerves building, until most of the attendees had left. Finally, he approached her. "Amara," he began, his voice tentative. She turned to face him, her expression cautious. I don't know how to say this, but I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know I can't undo what I did, but I've been trying to change, to learn." Amara regarded him in silence for a long moment. "And what have you learned so far?" "David, that I was wrong. About you. About so many things." His voice faltered. "I thought I was better than others because of my position, my background, but I wasn't. I was ignorant, arrogant, and I hurt people because of it." Amara's gaze softened, though her posture remained firm. "Change is a process," she said finally. "If you're serious, it's not my forgiveness you need, it's your own accountability." Following their conversation, David began attending workshops hosted by Belonging Matters. He didn't speak much at first, preferring to listen to the stories of others. Each testimony peeled back another layer of his understanding, forcing him to confront the deep-seated biases he had long ignored. One session focused on unconscious bias in leadership. As participants shared their experiences, David raised his hand, his voice shaky. "I used to think being a good manager meant protecting the brand, keeping it exclusive, but now I see that all I was protecting was my own ego. I used my position to exclude people. And that wasn't just wrong, it was cruel." The facilitator nodded, acknowledging that as a start. "But real change comes from action. What are you doing differently now?" David thought for a moment. "I've been volunteering, listening, and I've started mentoring young professionals, helping them navigate industries that have barriers I once upheld." While David worked on rebuilding his life, Amara continued to flourish. Under her leadership, Belonging Matters grew into a national organization, partnering with major brands to implement anti-bias training and diversify hiring practices. Her name became synonymous with resilience and advocacy. But she remained grounded. At home, her children were her greatest source of joy. One evening, as she tucked Kayla into bed, her daughter asked, "Mom, are you happy now?" Amara smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Kayla's face. "I'm proud," she said, "and that's better than happy." "Because of the bag?" Kayla teased, her eyes twinkling. Amara laughed. "No, sweetheart, because of what the bag came to represent. I thought I wanted it to prove something. But I've learned that my worth doesn't come from what I carry. It comes from who I am." Months later, Amara was approached by a major fashion conglomerate. They invited her to lead a global initiative to address racism and inequality in the retail industry. The offer was lucrative, but Amara hesitated. She had built something deeply personal with Belonging Matters, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to join the corporate world again. During a meeting with the company's executives, she made her stance clear. "If I join this initiative, I want full control over its direction. No red tape, no PR spin. This has to be about real change, not just saving face." The executives agreed, and Amara took the position, using it as a platform to amplify her work. She created scholarships for underrepresented designers, established accountability protocols for hiring practices, and even pushed for policies that required diversity in advertising campaigns as part of her initiative. Amara implemented a mentorship program for young leaders in the fashion and retail industries. David applied, unsure if he would even be considered. To his surprise, he was accepted, though not without hesitation from some of the team members. Under Amara's guidance, David began mentoring interns from marginalized backgrounds. One intern, a young black woman named Naomi, challenged him in ways he hadn't anticipated. "Why should I trust you?" Naomi asked during their first meeting. "You represent everything I'm up against." David didn't flinch. "You shouldn't," he admitted. "Not yet, but I'm here to earn that trust." Over time, Naomi saw genuine effort in David's actions. He advocated for her ideas during meetings, connected her with industry professionals, and provided honest advice without overshadowing her voice. By the end of her internship, Naomi told him, "I still don't forgive you for your past, But I respect the work you're doing now. 1 year after the incident at Dalemont Lux, Amara and David found themselves on the same stage at a conference focused on dismantling systemic racism in retail. Amara spoke first, her words powerful and inspiring. When David took the microphone, the audience was visibly skeptical. "I don't deserve to stand here," he began, "but I'm here because I've learned that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. I was once part of the problem, but now I'm committed to being part of the solution." The audience's applause was hesitant at first but grew louder as he continued. By the end of his speech, a young woman approached him and said, "Thank you for showing that change is possible." Amara watched from the side of the stage, a faint smile on her lips. Redemption wasn't a straight path, but David was walking it, and in his journey, she saw proof of what she had always believed, that change, while hard, was always possible. As the conference ended, Amara and David stood side by side, watching attendees file out. "You've come a long way," she said quietly. "So have you," he replied. "Thank you for giving me the chance to prove I could." Amara nodded. "Keep earning it." As they parted ways, both felt a sense of closure, not just with each other, but with the past. They had turned pain into progress, proving that even the deepest divides could be bridged with accountability, effort, and a shared commitment to justice. David Langley stood in the corner of the community center's auditorium, surrounded by people whose stories were as painful as they were powerful. It was the 5th workshop he had attended as part of his personal effort to change. And though he had spoken once or twice in previous sessions, he still felt like an intruder. That evening, the topic was accountability. A facilitator asked the group, "What does true accountability mean to you?" The room buzzed with murmurs, and one participant raised their hand. "It's not just saying sorry," the man said. "It's about owning your mistakes and doing the work to fix the harm you caused, even if you never get forgiveness." David felt a chill run through him. Those words struck a chord, a clear reminder of how far he still had to go. Later, as participants broke into smaller discussion groups, David found himself paired with a young woman named Tasha, a retail worker who had experienced discrimination in her own workplace. "You don't look like someone who'd understand what this feels like," Tasha said bluntly, crossing her arms. David didn't flinch. "You're right, I didn't understand it for a long time. But I'm here because I'm trying to change that." She eyed him skeptically but said nothing further. The silence was heavy but honest, and David took it as a step, small but meaningful. Amara's calendar was now packed with meetings, speeches, and interviews. Every day brought new challenges, but also new victories. Her nonprofit, Belonging Matters, had expanded its reach, partnering with major companies to reform their diversity and inclusion practices. One notable win was convincing a luxury retail competitor to implement a scholarship program for underrepresented young professionals in fashion. Despite her busy schedule, Amara made time for her children. On weekends, she and Kayla would sit together, creating vision boards for the future. Kayla wanted to design clothes, a dream inspired by the work her mother was now doing. "Do you think people will want to buy my designs?" Kayla asked one evening. Amara placed her hands on her daughter's shoulders. "They will if you believe in them, and yourself. You can do anything." Kayla, her daughter's smile was a reminder of why Amara kept pushing forward. This wasn't just about her, it was about building a better future for Kayla and others like her. One day, Amara received a letter from David. It was handwritten, each word carefully chosen. In it, he recounted his journey since the incident, the workshops, the volunteering, the uncomfortable but necessary conversations he had forced himself to have. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," the letter read. "I know I haven't earned that. But I want you to know that your strength has changed me. It's made me see the world differently. And I'm trying to be better, not just for myself, but for the people I once dismissed." Amara read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and set it aside. She didn't respond immediately, unsure of what to say. Could someone like David truly change? Did he deserve the chance to prove it? Her answer came unexpectedly during a meeting with her nonprofit's advisory board. They were reviewing candidates for a new mentorship program when one application caught her eye. It was David's. Some board members were hesitant. "Can we trust his motives?" one asked. Amara leaned forward, her voice steady. "If we're going to talk about dismantling systems of exclusion, we have to believe people are capable of change. Let's give him a chance to prove himself." David's acceptance into the mentorship program wasn't the end of his struggles. It was the beginning of a new set of challenges. His mentee, a fiery young woman named Naomi, was vocal about her doubts. "I've read about you," she said during their first meeting. "I know what you did. Why should I trust you to guide me?" David met her gaze, his tone measured. "You shouldn't, not yet. But I'm here to earn that trust. And if you feel like I'm not doing enough, call me out on it." Naomi's skepticism didn't fade overnight, but over weeks of collaboration, she began to see genuine effort in David's actions. He advocated for her ideas in meetings, helped her network with industry professionals, and shared insights from his own career, always with humility, never with arrogance. At the end of the program, Naomi approached him with a mix of gratitude and caution. "You've done better than I expected," she admitted, "but don't stop here. People like me are counting on people like you to keep doing the work." David nodded, her words echoing in his mind long after she walked away months later. Belonging Matters hosted its largest event yet, a national summit on systemic change in retail and fashion. Amara was the keynote speaker, her name now synonymous with progress in the industry. As she prepared backstage, her assistant approached her. "There's someone here to see you. He says it's important." Amara turned to see David standing near the entrance, holding a folder. He looked nervous but determined. "What is it, David?" she asked, crossing her arms. "I've been working on something," he said, handing her the folder. "It's a proposal for a program to address bias in hiring practices. I think it could make a real difference." Amara flipped through the pages, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she looked up at him. "This is good," she admitted, "but are you ready to stand in front of this crowd and own your past while presenting this?" David hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, it's time." The room was packed as Amara introduced David to the audience. "This next speaker isn't here because he's perfect," she began. "He's here because he's worked to confront his imperfections and use his experience to create change." David stepped onto the stage, the bright lights making his palms sweat. He took a deep breath and began. "I don't deserve to be here," he said, "but I'm here because I want to be part of the solution. I used to believe that exclusivity was the key to success. That belief hurt people, and it was wrong. Today, I'm proposing a program that focuses on inclusive hiring, mentorship, and education, because real success means lifting others up, not keeping them out." The audience was silent at first. Then applause began to ripple through the room. Amara watched from the sidelines, her chest swelling with a mix of pride and cautious optimism after the summit. Amara and David stood together in the empty auditorium. "You did well," she said simply. "Thank you," he replied, "for everything." Amara nodded, her gaze steady. "This doesn't erase the past, David, but it's a start." As they parted ways, Amara felt a sense of closure. The man who had once humiliated her had now become a small part of the movement she had built, a reminder that even the most broken systems could be challenged. And even the most flawed people could change. In the months that followed, Amara's initiative continued to grow, leaving an indelible mark on the industry. David remained an advocate, dedicating himself to mentoring young professionals and speaking about his journey at events across the country. For Amara, her greatest achievement wasn't the programs she had built or the policies she had influenced, it was the knowledge that she had turned pain into progress. Her journey proved that even in the face of injustice, resilience could triumph, and hope could spark change. As she tucked Kayla into bed one night, her daughter whispered, "Mom, you're my hero." Amara smiled, her heart full. "And you're mine."